Right. So first, what has prompted you to throw your hat into the ring this election?
I think that Chicago is at a critical juncture in terms of which direction it should go. It's experienced a long tenure of a mayor who served for 22 years, coming from a dynasty, a Chicago dynasty, of course, and the past 4 years have been about a different course to a degree, a different approach to governance. And I think that because the leader of the city, the chief executive, has been someone who has spent little time in Chicago and in Chicago's neighborhoods, the approach has been top-down in many policy thrusts that the city has moved, and consequently those decisions have been seen as being imposed on the city. I think the mayor's decision, for example, in the field of education, to close schools, to embark on the creation of so many charter schools, especially in minority communities, have not been well received. I think the decision to close that many schools is seen not only as being insensitive, but perhaps being reckless because of the devastating impact that closing so many schools at one time in certain communities has had in those communities, literally snuffing out life in communities where the school was the sign of stability, the sign of consistency, of safety, of a place that children could gather and parents could gather in, provide a certain level of security in many of those communities. So I think that's an example. Another example would be in the area of public safety. The mayor said this would be a second great priority of his administration, and over the 4 years that he's been mayor, we saw this uptick of violence, gang violence and gun violence in certain parts of the city that I think have made everyone feel unsafe, and that the strategies of a second police superintendent who was brought in from the outside to try new strategies hasn't been successful, and that people have become impatient and concerned that those strategies have failed, that they've not addressed the underlying causes of the violence, and that new things need to be tried, and new things that in fact aren't so new that have been proven effective nationally, things like community policing. Community policing requires that, or an essential component of community policing is that you build relationships of trust and respect between community members and the police, so that you can have effective communication, information sharing, confidentiality, so that people have the willingness to report crime, to engage in proactive, preventive measures in solving crime when it happens. People in their neighborhoods are really the experts in that neighborhood, particularly as it relates to crime. If people don't feel that the trust is there, they're not going to come forward. If they feel that sensitive information that's shared isn't kept confidential, they won't come forward. And I think that we suffer from that in Chicago, and that needs to change. So I think, and then the third area, the mayor said he would address is the city's fiscal state and the state of finance in the city and its future remain in limbo. They haven't been addressed, so we have a significant deficit that has to be reduced, and we have a very challenging pension problem. So in terms of those three areas, the mayor doesn't get an A, doesn't get a B. I'd say he has come up short in all three. And those are good reasons why I've decided to run. I believe the city is at a point right now like I haven't seen it in a long, long time. I think there's a greater willingness and a recognition that only if Chicago and its neighborhoods come together can the city be reunified. I think people feel apart. I think people feel divided. I think the mayor has done a really good job at separating the prosperous city center from neighborhoods in the outlying part, low-income neighborhoods in particular. I think he's separated the very wealthy people from the middle class from the struggling working class, from the poorest folks in Chicago, and then separated people along race and ethnicity at the same time, because he's not a unifier. He doesn't have the disposition to engage people where they're at, to really listen and to incorporate people's ideas. You have to know how to accept other ideas and criticism and how to learn to incorporate those things. So I think Chicago is at a point where it wants to change courses, and I believe that given my history as a community builder, as an elected official in city council, state senate, and in the county, has prepared me for this moment, and I'm very excited about this.
So can I ask one question? I want to ask, since we're interviewing you the day after the non-indictment in Ferguson, and you talk about the Chicago being this city of different neighborhoods, that some of them don't feel part of it.
Yes.
Talk about how you think the police need to operate differently in relation to the neighborhoods to make sure this doesn't happen in Chicago.
You know, Ferguson may be one of the worst examples of community policing, or the lack thereof, where the relationship of trust and respect got so out of being a reality that people have lost hope. There's great distrust. The police, I think, may have come to be seen more as an occupying force than those who serve and protect, those who engage, those who solve problems and understand who the problem elements are, who the criminal element is in a community that's hurting the community. And I think it's coupled with other things there, like the lack of political empowerment for the African American community, probably a legacy of discrimination and racism, particular to Ferguson, that's created this very volatile situation that, because of the very tragic shooting of a young African American man, people are looking to channel their discontent, their rage, and their anger. It's further complicated, the situation in Ferguson, by the arrival of outsiders who clearly are just there to agitate, perhaps to provoke people into violence, and it makes the situation that much more volatile. But I think if there's something to be learned, it's that we have to engage in activities that leave behind something positive. I think the parents of Michael Brown have expressed that people engage in activities that build something, not that destroy community, not that pull people further apart, but to do something. And I think that we all have the responsibility to engage in that. But once again, I think it's the lack of implementing community policing rooted in trust and respect and mutual support that has given us the incendiary relationship that we see and that we view, with the news report that come out of Ferguson.
Okay.
Well, you mentioned the long political career you've had. You have a very long and impressive resume. You've been active in politics at city, state, and county levels. Could you speak a little bit about your experience on the Cook County board, and since that's your most recent, and what that would bring to your role as mayor?
First of all, at Cook County, a little bit over 4 years ago, when we took or almost 4 years to the date, actually, we inherited a government that was largely adrift, a government that was known for patronage, for privilege, for inefficiency, for corruption, and one that also came with a huge deficit, $487 million, as I recall, in the first year, under the leadership of President Tony Preckwinkle, and a new consensus on the board among commissioners that we needed to put it on the right track. 4 years later, I think we've made great progress in giving it a sense of purpose, a direction, making it much more transparent, making it accountable, establishing goals and objectives and measurable outcomes in terms of productivity of different departments and agencies. The information technology investments that have been made to modernize Cook County government, I think, are also a huge step forward. If I could just briefly synthesize what I think Cook County government represents today, it's a government that has been turned around. It exists now on a much more solid footing. I think we've gone quite a ways in establishing trust, winning over the trust of taxpayers in Cook County. And lastly, very proud of the fact that Cook County government is perhaps the only government in northern Illinois that can claim that we cut taxes by repealing the Stroger sales tax in Cook County, and demonstrating that we can live within our means. So I'm proud of the record and my role at Cook County government as floor leader for President Tony Preckwinkle.
You, in your first response, you did allude to the enormous fiscal challenges that the city is going to be facing in the next few years as the mandated contributions to the firefighters and police funds kick in. What does the mayor really need to do in order to protect the city's balance sheet going forward? What would you be doing?
I think one, we need to get an accurate assessment of the city's fiscal house. In the 2015 budget, we didn't appropriate for the payment that's due to the pension funds. But I think we also have to look at a long-term solution, and that means having to make some very difficult decisions on the revenue side of things. I mean, that will be critical in terms of a long-term solution. I have assembled a group of experts in municipal finance to look at what the tough revenue options will be. There are many measures on the table. We're mulling through those, poring through the variety of difficult decisions and considerations we'll have to make. Those will look at, take a deep dive into the commuter tax, the stock transaction tax, maybe looking at legalized marijuana very, very carefully, and really looking at all of the implications of that, looking at the Colorado experience, because they've, sort of been on the cutting edge of this. Other measures that I'm not that warm to, like casino gambling, because of its regressive nature, I think, and that it tends to attract people who shouldn't even be in a gambling hall. All of those things, I think, we're taking a very careful look at, and we'll be issuing more specific papers on my positions on the fiscal side of things.
Are you able to speak at all about any kind of service cuts or anything like that that you're not
Not at this time. I think we're looking at a new set of priorities for the city and the fiscal implications of putting neighborhoods at the center of city governance. But at the same time, we want to engage people in the neighborhoods in a conversation about those new priorities. The new priorities, I think, will dictate some of the revenue actions that we'll have to take to ensure that we begin reining in the deficits, as well as to address the pension challenge for the long haul.
You spoke earlier about how you feel under Mayor Emanuel. He has really divided the city, and we are seeing a great deal of economic disparities right now, with massive income gaps between rich and poor, diminishing middle class in the city. How would you work to unify? Elaborate on that a bit more.
I think that my experience and training as a community builder in the Little Village area, but also working with people in other communities throughout Chicagoland, give me a really good insight into how you build strong and vibrant and healthy communities. In Little Village, we've been able to, for example, and it's a working class, fairly low income community, with many immigrants in it. We've been able to make schools the center of community by keeping school, by first of all, creating the only high school campus of its kind in Chicago, a campus of 4 small schools, each with its own principal, with a local advisory school council, with a curricular focus, whether it's social justice or math and science, cultural arts, or foreign languages, and with a population that's about 70% Latino, 30% African American, serves South Lawndale, North Lawndale community, or Little Village and North Lawndale communities. And we've been able to open up a series of other schools, elementary schools, that stay open until nighttime. Those schools become the center of community as they serve kids, students, after school hours, with everything from homework to the arts, dance, theater, singing, learning to play an instrument. Their parents are in the schools too, doing what? Learning English as a second language, learning how to use a computer, learning workforce skills so that they can get better jobs, all of those things, wellness, physical fitness, all those things can be done in a school setting if you invest in neighborhood schools. So my embrace about the role of neighborhood schools in providing safe spaces, becoming even greater assets in those communities is key. We've also, in Little Village, addressed the issue of public safety. Little Village, historically has been challenged with the presence of gang violence there. High school, high levels of high school dropout rates. By bringing the first set of community organizations, churches, and schools, we were able to address gang violence and reduce the number of homicide rates over a period. So my training as an urban planner resulted in the creation of the first quality of life plan for Little Village. And as we did it in Little Village, It was done in 14 other communities throughout the city of Chicago, from Southeast Chicago to Logan Square. This is the new approach to community development at a pretty significant scale. I think much can be learned from that process thus far in Chicago's communities, and that those are the experiences, that's the network of experience that I will bring to the fifth floor in terms of neighborhood revitalization, how to be strategic in the investments by the city, by the state, but also by the private sector. I think I can be a catalyst in getting the central business district leaders and the businesses there to understand that we can only have a great city if we build great neighborhoods. The two are linked very closely, and I think that given where we're at in Chicago's development, it's a critical time and one where there can be some really creative partnerships to ensure that the prosperity in Chicago is shared more equitably.
Let me ask, in relation to Matt's question, the minimum wage in Chicago versus what's going on with the state. What's your position on that, and where do you think Chicago can come in on that?
Well, I like the idea of a living wage everywhere in Illinois because I think it raises families. It goes a long way, I think, toward reducing poverty, and I think that's very important in a society where we've seen the concentration of wealth again among fewer and fewer people. So I support that. Historically, I've represented neighborhoods that are working class, that are fairly low wage earners. So I support the minimum wage. I think I like the city minimum wage because it's higher. Thus, it would improve the quality of life of more people.
Do you have a target that you would like the minimum wage to go to in the city of Chicago?
Well, I've seen studies and reports that suggest that the $15 level is perhaps a good living wage for working families. But I think what has been presented in the city council as an increase in the wage is a step toward that, and I think it's a positive thing.
Okay.
3 years ago, you championed a proposal, which I believe was successful, wherein the Cook County Sheriff declined to detain persons wanted for immigration offenses unless the federal government foot the bill. And that also comes in light of President Preckwinkle's work on really minimizing the jail population the best we can. Given your work there and other work you've done on immigration issues, what were your thoughts on President Obama's speech last week?
I welcome the President's announcement and the executive relief that he has chimed in on the topic of immigration and especially undocumented immigrants in the country. It will help about 4 million people, we believe, and that's a welcome change to the inability of Congress to act on this issue. It will help bring an end and a reduction to the number of deportations of people who are contributing immensely to the U.S. economy, people who are revitalizing neighborhoods in Chicago, in other cities, people who are creating and contributing to the development of retail strips in many neighborhoods that were in decline. New activity, new stores open up, they hire people, it's good for the local economy. They make many contributions, immigrants do, so I welcome it. At the same time, it demonstrates that the ordinance we passed 2 years ago in Cook County saying we should not selectively target for detention or deportation immigrants, that we were right. Not only did we defend the Constitution, we stood up for constitutional protections, and we were the first county to do so in the U.S. The fact that through the executive act, the President's executive action, the Secure Communities program is ending is a tribute and a testimony that we were on the right track in Cook County. So I'm very proud of that. we saved the county hundreds of thousands of dollars by not complying with these ICE detainer holds that were being requested of us. And I was very happy to hear the president say that the program of secure communities will end and that there will be a refocus of the strategy under Homeland Security.
An interesting part of what Obama did was it was related to children who are citizens and their parents might be undocumented.
Yes.
But the LGBT community is concerned about this because obviously a lot of LGBT undocumented folks don't have children that tie them in that way. Do you have any solution that you might propose in that front?
Well, I'm disappointed that approximately 6 to 7 million people, maybe more than that, will not qualify for relief under the president's action. I continue to ask and implore the Congress to step up and carry out its function under the Constitution, which is to address immigration as it relates to foreign policy. Because of the Congress's unwillingness or inability to act, we wind up with patchwork solutions. As good as there is in the president's executive action, it leaves out too many people. And these people remain vulnerable in the economy. They remain vulnerable to discrimination. The LGBTQ community is one of those segments of that class of people, of immigrants, who don't qualify, and it's unfortunate. Congress can still remedy this. They can act and they can find the courage to understand today's realities, and they can prevent a lot of suffering for a lot of people.
Before shifting gears to some other questions about LGBT-related issues, one other thing I wanted to ask was related to education, which you spoke about towards the beginning of our interview. You've now received the backing of the teachers union, which is a key endorsement for progressive candidates. Now, the mayor of Chicago at this point essentially handpicks the members of the CPS board. In late October, you said you were kind of grappling with that issue, but that's still a key goal for many progressives in the city, is to get rid of that. Where do you currently stand on the issue of an elected school board here?
I've been for an elective school board for a long time. For example, the bill in 1995 that gave the mayor of Chicago the ability to appoint the school board without even city council consent, I voted against it. This was the same bill that started the creation of charter schools in the city of Chicago that I think has just gone way beyond the original thinking. We've had charter mania, and most of those charters have been located in poor communities, especially in African American and Latino communities, and there's no clear evidence that it is a superior school system or set of schools than the neighborhood schools, public schools in Chicago. So I remain committed to the idea of an elected school board. I will be campaigning in favor of the referendum on the ballot. When elected, I will go to Springfield seeking to change the law so that we can have an elected school board in Chicago. The Chicago School District is the only one in Illinois that doesn't have an elected school board. I think there is an element of democracy and accountability in that, and that we need an elected school board.
What would you do to combat youth homelessness in the city? That's something that a good number of those are LGBT youth. They make up a large fraction of that population. What kind of work would you do?
The homeless and homelessness challenge that we're facing in Chicago is a growing one, and we haven't been successful in addressing it like I think we should have by now. It's been the subject of conversation for a long time. LGBTQ members, especially young people under 21, comprise a significant segment, I'm told, of and reports that I've read of this population. I think we need to look at how to address this more effectively through a variety of housing programs in Chicago, whether it is public housing or other housing. Young people who are LGBT need safe places where they can stay. I think part of the reason we don't have better data on this is young people are pretty resilient. They find places to stay, places to sleep, but it is a significant problem. I think we have a responsibility to ensure for their well-being and for their safety, and to make sure that they're getting counseling services, that they're getting other services that are really key to ensuring that they live safely and secure. So I think we need to look at our housing policies and look at what type of housing arrangements that are safe and secure and that are responsive to the needs of young people who are LGBT.
On a more general level, what interactions have you had with Chicago's LGBT community in the past, and how will you be reaching out to them?
Well, I've had a long history, and one that I frequently celebrate and remember. Many people may not recall that I was a young member of the Chicago City Council when the first Human Rights Ordinance came before us, and that it was a challenging issue, a new issue that we had to grapple with in City Council. I represented a community that was and continues to be heavily Catholic, and the decision to stay consistent as a progressive leader, always seeking to learn and to incorporate how human progress moves forward, and that it's important to make right decisions even if they may be unpopular at a given point in time. So I'm very proud of my vote, the vote that I took in 1988 for Chicago's first landmark ordinance in 1988. I believe it was either late 87, early 88, in favor of it. And it opened up the doors to many new friendships and relationships that I've cultivated over the years with the LGBTQ community. As a state senator in Springfield, I voted for the human rights statute or bill that came before the Senate on at least two occasions. It didn't make it out of the Senate, but I stood consistently in favor of the community. And I have to tell you, one of the greatest experiences, I wasn't in Springfield to be a part of that, but the marriage equality legislation is another tribute to doing the right thing, to understanding how human society is, moving forward and evolving, and it certainly is a testament to the vision and the courage of the LGBT leaders who wouldn't take no for an answer, who continued to push the envelope and to say that marriage is a solemn institution, that we shouldn't discriminate against people because of their sexual identity or orientation, and that if people of the same gender want to get married, that they should. So it's a really fascinating insight into how issues that at one time may be very unpopular come to be understood as we grapple with the fact that probably every family has a member who is gay or lesbian or transgender, and I think that the realization that it's really a family issue is what gives people the understanding and the strength to embrace everything that is humanity.
Well, we have strong laws on the books in Illinois, but what can the mayor do to really ensure that those laws are enforced? Discrimination laws. Just because we have those laws doesn't mean they're going to be followed in many parts of the city?
I think the mayor has to be a leader, and you lead by example. You don't lead by doing a poll on how popular an issue is. You lead by doing what's right. And I think that being an advocate, that being someone who engages communities, someone who recognizes and spotlights emerging leadership, someone who is willing to sit and discuss and dissect issues, someone who is willing to be a leader on important issues to all communities in Chicago is essential, because one is mayor of the entire city. You cannot bring a parochial view. You have to be willing to accept everyone and to lead by example. I think the mayor can be a leader. You can use the office of the mayor as a bully pulpit to educate, to challenge, and to bring people around. If the city is embarking on a new direction, so it must involve all sectors of the city and all communities as part of that process, so that we truly can build a new consensus and reach the greatest degree of common purpose, so as to move the city forward.
On that front, the transgender community in particular has had a lot of issues with over-policing, harassment. It probably like it used to be for the gay community 30 years ago. Have you had much interaction with the transgender community and in particular its issues that are even more complicated these days in relation to police?
I'm aware in speaking with police officers, with individuals who are transgender. I live half a block from a club in Little Village. It used to be La Cueva. I'm not sure if they changed the name or not, but people still call it La Cueva. So I've encountered many members of the transgender community over decades, and I've had the opportunity to chat with them on the street, at the restaurant, where I cut my hair. They frequent that shop at 26th and Keeler, and I've been able to get a better understanding of their reality and the challenges, the discrimination, the bullying, the ridicule that they're subjected to. And then I've also had conversations with police officers who have shared with me the evolution in the thinking and the practice and the treatment of this community. So it's one that is evolving. I think the presence of more police officers who are lesbian and gay helps in that regard. And I have to commend people like Sheriff Dart at the county jail for being responsive to that and issuing, as I understand, policies for the treatment of individuals who are transgender. I think the police department in some places is also moving in that direction, and I embrace it. I think it's part of accepting people for who they are and being as respectful and as responsive to equal treatment of those individuals. So I recognize their plight, so to speak, in society and the things that they have to live with. And again, it's part of the challenge of, how do we be as humane as possible to everyone?
Okay.
What do you think needs to be done really to try to just stem numbers of HIV, AIDS infections, which really still remain a problem in the city and in the rest of the country?
I think we need to continue to educate people. Popular education, street level education is key. But I think public education through the media, through social media, especially for young people, is also very important. We must ensure that groups, organizations that provide services and education, like in my backyard in Little Village, Project Vida, I think has done a great job of educating people, of making condoms readily available throughout the community, doing away with the taboo of showing a condom, how it's used, and having them available everywhere, has helped people really come around and overcome their taboos or some of their religious views toward it, and to get real about it. I think groups that provide assistance and do work to prevent HIV infection and work with people living with AIDS need to be supported. I've heard that sometimes they've had problems with the money not flowing on a timely basis, and that's really critical because cash flow sometimes for these organizations is particularly sensitive, and as someone who's had to run a nonprofit, you need to have reliable sources of funding. So I think we owe it to that community, which is engaging in very, very important work, that's doing preventive work, that saves the public health system money if they do their work effectively, that we need to be as supportive as possible and ensure that if there are delays, that we find out where they're happening, why they're happening, and that we prevent that from happening, because they're doing very important preventive work that's saving us money at public health systems, whether it's the cities or the county's health system.
This is my last question. This is a bit more abstract. You were a great champion of Mayor Harold Washington and very active at the time of his administration, which in many regards kind of the halcyon days of progressive politics in the city. Will Mayor Washington be an influence on you, and how?
Harold Washington was a breath of fresh air, was a great innovator and a catalyst in the city of Chicago, with significant controversy because people who shake things up tend to be that way. I think helped move the city forward, was embracing of communities that were not recognized, that were invisible to many Chicagoans, opened the doors of government to many communities, women, Latinos, the gay community. There was this public embrace of the community. It was a great time, tumultuous and great. That's a long time ago. Chicago, I think, is a different city. To want to build a new coalition of this time requires new strategies. We've learned a lot since then. Chicago is not the polarized city that it was in the 80s. It's much more diverse in so many ways that engaging all of the neighborhoods is probably easier. The technological advances help in that regard. We didn't have social media in the 80s. We have it now. It's critical. Young people relate that way. So Chicago needs to come together in a new way. Certainly there are still ethnic groups and concentrations and enclaves throughout the city, but I think there is a greater willingness to understand that Chicago only moves forward when all of us can reach out and try to reach a greater consensus on more topics as it relates to improving the quality of life for everyone.
Okay, I guess my final question is what's your overall strategy in terms of fighting an incumbent that has a huge war chest? What are your steps to getting to that win in February?
First of all, people. We've demonstrated when we filed yesterday that about 1,000 people circulated my petitions. That's huge. So before we spent one dime, we collected 63,000 plus signatures with 1,000 people circulating them. That's huge. No one else did that in 3 weeks. So we're very excited about that. Two, we won't raise $10 million, but we will raise enough to be able to deliver a message on television, on radio, and on social media, and many door knockers. I think that's our greatest asset. But that's not to say that we're going to do it on a shoestring budget. We're working hard to ensure that we can get on television and radio and deliver a message. If we do that, we can win this election with less than half of what the incumbent has in his war chest at the present time. I think Chicago wants to move in a different direction, and that a recipe for victory can cost a lot less than what we may be conventionally thinking is necessary to do it.
Perfect.